welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. So I'm Roman Schwartz, the Partner Development Manager for CloudEndure at AWS. I'm thrilled to be joined by both the EagleDream Technologies team and CloudEndure today. And we're going to be discussing the changing business continuity and disaster recovery landscape. Our format today is going to be a bit of a roundtable discussion. So we're going to have our experts answer questions, do a little back and forth, and then we're going to have you guys have a Q&A at the end there. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping notes. There's a chat box that you'll be able to find at the bottom of your screen in the main toolbar, as well as the ability to raise your hand or say yes or no in case there's any yes or no questions that come up. You can also just type in any questions that you have, and we'll be happy to answer them. And lastly, a copy of the slide deck as well as the recording will be sent out after the webinar. So now that we have that covered, let's move on to what we have lined up for you today. So we'll start with brief introductions. I actually have the misfortune of hosting a webinar with not one, but two Justins. So we're going to refer to Justin from EagleDream as Justin and Justin from CloudEndure as JD. Just for the purposes of this. After the quick intros, we will delve into some of our topics, and then we'll have that Q&A at the end. So let me just begin by, I guess, introducing Justin. Justin, how's it going?
Hey, Roman. It's going great. Hey, everybody. Justin Guzzi here from EagleDream. I'm one of the senior cloud solutions architects here with the company. I'm professionally certified on AWS platform, and I'm also one of 3 AWS Partner Network Ambassadors from EagleDream here. So we're actually, we're the second company to have the most partner ambassadors for AWS. So it's a pretty cool accomplishment. A little bit of a background about me. So you know, I essentially help our customers get to the cloud. My specialty is in infrastructure, migrating Microsoft workloads. You know, I'm an SME in CloudEndure and disaster recovery. So really anything migration related, DevOps related falls into my wheelhouse. I've been working in AWS for about 7 years now and cloud technologies in general. So I've been around the block and seen some of the really cool things that have come out from AWS over the time. So that's a little bit about me. I'll kick it over to JD.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin. Nice to meet everybody. Thank you, guys. I know everybody's schedule these days is hectic, to say the least. So do really appreciate you joining the webinar. Hopefully it'll be of value. Myself, I am with the CloudEndure team at AWS. CloudEndure was a company that was acquired, let's see, we're 15, 16 months ago, to help build out AWS's DR strategy. So I've been with the organization for about 3.5 years now, helping run both the migration and now specifically the disaster recovery branch of CloudEndure. So that is me.
Excellent. All right, so let's sort of kick this off with a question for JD, and we'll bat it around from there. But how is the disaster recovery landscape changing in response to COVID-19?
So I truly think we could probably spend the entire webinar on this question alone, but it is reshaping it in so many different ways. You know, being part of this organization for a while, we've seen so many different use cases, right? Customers that want to protect virtual machines, physical machines, already running in the cloud, cross-cloud, cross-region. There's so many different ways that companies want to orchestrate their DR. But now with COVID, it really changes that from a fundamental standpoint. And what I mean by that is, you know, we have organizations that invest millions and millions of dollars into having, say, you know, a data center or 2 or 15. That really changes, right? It changes your approach when you can't walk in the building. You can't have people constantly monitoring systems. And I think as a response to that, a lot of organizations are in fact looking to the cloud as an alternative to their DR strategy, whether that be for themselves, their customers. It really doesn't matter. I think that they're looking more at a flexibility standpoint. How do we take our strategy that as an organization, we send back to our shareholders, our leadership, our customers, and how do we really provide something that's robust without having to do traditional methods like, data center to data center. So again, I think I could honestly spend quite a while talking about that, but Justin, what's your take on that?
Yeah, Justin, absolutely. I think it's really interesting to see how businesses have had to pivot, and kind of change the way that they've been doing things. You look at more traditional, maybe brick and mortar style businesses where people are, if they're in retail, people are walking through the door and looking at products. Right now, that's kind of changed with COVID, right? It's more based around an online presence now. And that means that you have to rely on IT systems to be able to serve your customers. So you take that brick and mortar away, you rely on a website to provide some form of commerce and business operations. What happens if that website goes down, right? Everything is now totally dependent upon those technologies that you are providing to serve your customers. So if you don't have high availability and resiliency built in, and those systems go down, what's your DR plan, right? And that totally changes, I think, for many businesses, whereas it was traditionally something happens to our store, how do we continue to operate? Now it's something happens to our website, how do we continue to operate? It's totally different strategy.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Justin. I think you're right. I think you hit a good point there. In that, I would have to imagine, right? Organizations are redefining what's critical, right? And you put a good example, right? I'm sure there are many retail companies out there, for example, that I'm sure part of their business was online, but maybe they relied on people actually coming into the store, and now that website becomes mission critical. So I think that not only is it just the strategy, but it's taking a look at the organization as a whole and saying, okay, what workloads, what applications, what databases are now, because of the changing landscape, what's important to us as an organization. So there's so many different angles that COVID has touched from a commercial perspective, that the DR landscape is going to go along with that, right? And you need something that's going to be able to be flexible and be able to scale with an organization that's not used to high transactional e-commerce. So it's really interesting in the way it's changed, unfortunately, but it does allow companies to redefine what's mission critical for them and put together that plan.
Yeah, and I think too, you touched on having hands-on equipment earlier, or people being able to support their data centers. If businesses are still relying on more traditional styles of backup and DR, for example, tape media and things like that, if those people are sick, if those people can't enter the facility for whatever reason because of COVID, how are you going to switch those tapes out? So you're going to have to maybe pivot to a different type of technology, something digital, something where you're sending off your backups to the cloud and archiving them somewhere else. So again, right, it totally changes the landscape.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think it actually brings an interesting point to it as well, where, we can talk about what's next. COVID is a very interesting and spooky problem, where before you could go from, data center to data center for your disaster recovery, and what happens when that's not an option, and all of a sudden you have to think bigger picture. So I guess the question that I would pose to both of you is, how do you sort of prepare for the next thing? What is the next thing to come, and what would you do to do it a little differently?
It's a good question. I mean, it's hard for any of us to prepare for something like this, but I think, having a strategy, as I mentioned, that's flexible. And I think that that's really the direction that the the organizations that are starting to leverage the cloud are headed. It builds at the very least a foundation for the organization to have a strategy in place. I truly believe that the most important thing, though, is regardless of the type of disaster we have, what's the plan behind it, right? There needs to be some kind of a strategy and a plan and a testing, because that's really the best way to prepare. I mean, we're not going to know what the next COVID is going to be. Hopefully we'll never know what that is, but you got to have a plan in place if there is a disaster. So I would say building that out is probably the first step in preparation.
Yeah, and I think agility is a huge part of that too. Like what you said, Justin, being flexible, and being able to update your run books and your plans as you continue to test. It's an iterative, ongoing process where it's never we're gonna create our playbook for recovering from a disaster and that's it. All right, we're good now for the next 3 years. It's not like that at all. You have to be able to continuously update your documentation, update your tools and technologies. It's a really important part of the process.
Great.
Just out of curiosity, before we move on, I guess I'll throw out a quick poll question to the people in the audience. Has COVID-19 caused you to rethink, the way you treat business continuity, disaster recovery? Is this something that's now changed the way you've done it, or have you always done it and it's been working for you? And I guess there's a yes or no options there at the bottom if you want to chime in. While we wait for that, we can move on to the next question. So, what are the tools or resources one can leverage to better prepare or prevent for the future?
Yeah, I can take this one. So there are many tools out there, right? And there's really not, I wouldn't say that there's a simple one size fits all for any type of a solution as it relates to DR. It's really going to depend on certain factors. So determining, what's the RPO, the recovery point objective, or the RTO, the recovery time objective, to get a system back up and running, in the event of a disaster. And once you kind of determine that, you determine, the systems that are in scope. You do something called the business impact analysis to determine if a particular system goes down, what's the impact to the business, and how can it potentially affect my bottom line? Those are all of the things that really go into what tools and resources you leverage. So, Justin and Roman are on from CloudEndure here, and CloudEndure is one of those tools that provides really low RPOs and RTOs to get a system back up and running. And it's automated, orchestrated SaaS solution, great for anything that's potentially running on-prem today. Maybe it's a physical box, a virtual machine, anything that's running in EC2 and AWS. Again, really great solutions that you can implement to get a really low RPO, RTO. And so I would say that a lot of the tools out there today work great between hybrid, between on-prem workloads and cloud workloads, hybrid workloads. If you are already in AWS today, there's plenty of services. There's a lot of the native AWS backup services available across the different services that have ability to do things like point-in-time recovery within, like the last 5 minutes. You can also get the global redundancies of AWS built into the fabric of your application. So leveraging things like multiple AZs, maybe multiple regions, get that high availability that's already built in. If you're not in AWS, and you're operating on-prem, again, you can still leverage a lot of the existing tools that you're using today. A lot of third-party backup and DR tools that integrate directly into S3, for example. So S3 is AWS's really low-cost object-based storage service, and then use that to send your backups, archive them for however long period of time. And again, CloudEndure is one of those tools that can operate in either an on-prem or a cloud environment today. So again, it's going to depend on what's your business requirements, what are the technical requirements, how are you operating, how are you going to fail over, what type of capabilities do you need to determine those tools. Justin, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I mean, certainly from my seat, leveraging a tool like CloudEndure certainly helps there. But regardless of that and the actual solution, I think what organizations are seeing now and changing is defining these processes is absolutely one, like you mentioned. I mean, that's got to be first and foremost. But looking towards flexibility and automation, and I know those are, from a webinar perspective, a little bit of buzzwords, but the landscape is always going to be changing. Always, right? I mean, when I first got in this seat with CloudEndure 3 years ago versus what we, are doing now, it's completely different. And that's not to say that, you're going to purchase a solution or work with a third party and it's going to be completely obsolete. What I mean by that is you want to look for solutions that can always be changing, always be flexible, and furthermore, build in automation. I think that people are seeing these processes that they've predefined as, I don't want to say antiquated because maybe that's not the right word, but that there needs to be changes within the organization to scale to something like a COVID, right? And I know that's also an extreme example, but having things like CloudEndure, leveraging expertise in the platform like EagleDream, using the scalability of AWS, or building out from an on-premise perspective a strong business continuity plan, those are going to be the tools that you have as an organization to really be prepared for the next event, whether that be a quick outage or something worldwide like this. So I think really building that foundation in your DR strategy and understanding internally what that plan looks like goes a long, long way to having stability within the organization from a DR perspective.
Yeah, and everything you just touched on around flexibility and automation, all of those things come with the AWS cloud. I mean,
Right.
they're automatically built in, from a global infrastructure perspective. And if you really think about the capabilities from a global perspective, if you want to have a secondary site that you can fail over to, and you want to, maybe it's a data center, it's going to take a while to build that data center out. If you're looking at a new location, it can take months or years, whereas AWS can be my DR failover location, and I can get that spun up in a matter of minutes to hours and have a fully implemented solution. I think that's definitely why we're huge advocates of cloud, is because it's all there for you. It's been built, it's been vetted, it's compliant, it's secure, and it provides everything that you need to not only run your workloads, but to fail over workloads if you want to use it as a DR site.
Yeah, I think your point is valid too, in that there's so many different ways that organizations run this. It does not mean by any means that the on-prem world is dead, right?
Right.
There's so many customers that we have that maintain their primary, but use the AWS flexibility as their DR site. In addition, right? I mean, I'll just say from a CloudEndure perspective, it's also it's a very good way to dip your toes in the water of what the platform can do, right? You get that foundation of having the AWS flexibility, and then, as you prepare for a failover or, the cloud journey and the migration, you've got that built out as that changes. So certainly companies maintain their on-prem, but this is a really good way to start to see some of the advantages that the platform can bring.
Interesting. And I think that I would actually, I guess my question is sort of, how would you deal with something where you have a lot of legacy technology? I think you both kind of touched on this a little bit. I don't have everything set up. It's not all very simple. It's not all very easy to either move or set up a new data center inside AWS. what would be the way to deal with something where it's kind of a hodgepodge? And I know it's not just, you know, CloudEndure, but what would be your answers? I'm curious. I'll start with JD. Sorry, I'll give one of you a chance to go first.
You know, Justin's probably the expert on that, but look, I mean, I think that that's going to be across any organization. There's going to be cases of legacy applications and databases. That is certainly something from a cloud perspective that you can use to leverage to optimize those. So that's something that AWS can provide. From a DR perspective, you know, if it's not something that you're going to refactor, but you still want protection for, there's a lot of ways to do that, right? Still providing backups on those workloads, providing, you know, disaster recovery. Certainly we're source agnostic as long as it's supported by AWS. So there's really a lot of plans that you can put together from a legacy perspective if you're not looking to retire them, because AWS can help optimize those for you.
Yeah, and legacy doesn't equate to can't run in the cloud by any means, because the truth is that anything that you're running on-prem today can most likely be migrated up into AWS and continue to run the same, if not better, on AWS's platform. So, you know, if you've got a mix of different applications and different systems, AWS can support that no problem. And quite frankly, you know, AWS makes it known that, you know, hybrid is absolutely supported. There's so many different types of technologies, whether it's VPN-based technologies, connectivity, to be able to have a hybrid setup and be able to operate in both cloud and on-prem. You know, it's pretty easy to do. So yeah, I would say no concerns there about running legacy applications. And if you do want to modernize, again, like Justin said, I should say JD said, AWS has many tools and technologies to help you modernize your applications.
Yep.
Gotcha. So before we move on to the next question, just a reminder, if you guys have questions throughout this, if you want to raise your hand or just put a question into the chat box, feel free to shoot it over. If we don't get to it at the time, we'll get to it right at the end of this as well. So prior to COVID-19, what were the use cases and common goals for developing a DR strategy?
So I can take that one. Prior to COVID, it seems like a long time ago. It's hard to remember. But you know, the use cases vary, right? I think that a large majority from, and this is just from my perspective, we're using it from on-prem to protect workloads in AWS. That's certainly a very strong case for us at the CloudEndure AWS side. A lot of organizations that were early adopters of the cloud also used it to do disaster recovery within the cloud. So protecting workloads like Justin had mentioned earlier, different AZs or cross region. And then another strong use case was even protecting workloads cross cloud. So companies that didn't want to, put all their eggs in one basket, do from, Azure to AWS or GCP to Azure. There's a lot of different goals that organizations have. It really depends on where you see the safest and most compliant disaster recovery site. So certainly from a CloudEndure perspective, we see a wide gamut of where people are leveraging. Certainly now we are AWS. So typically the use cases, not typically, all the use cases are in one direction or another pointed at AWS to use as their DR site. So that's really what we see. I mean, Justin, I don't know if you see some different things in the field.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at what a traditional DR strategy looked like before COVID-19, I would say that most of those plans looked at it from the perspective of a natural disaster, right? Like a meteor, right? We always hear that example. If that takes out a data center, how do we get back up and running? And I think COVID has really changed that, right? We're not talking about something being wiped off the map from a physical perspective. It's different now, right? It's a virus. It's different. Whereas we don't have the people. Maybe we don't have the people to
Yep.
execute some type of a DR plan or scenario. And those traditional plans would assume that all of the people in your run book could participate, right? You got the tree of individuals that, okay, yes, we may not have a building to work out of, but we've got the right people. Well, now with COVID-19, if half of your workforce is sick, not everyone's going to be able to participate and potentially resume business operations. So again, it changes the perspective of what a DR plan actually looks like now. From another angle of it too, it might be, well, you've got a company has a VPN system in place to be able to allow workers to work remotely, and that maybe was only sized to fit a subset of remote workers. Now, all of again, we're dealing with a pandemic here. Everything being closed across the entire world, that whole workforce is now working remotely and hitting that VPN. Will that VPN solution handle all of your workers, right? Again, you're looking at it from a much, much different perspective now. And I think it's important to remember that, BCDR is not just backup and recovery of a system. It's really your entire business operation. So you have to look at it, kind of have to take that 10,000 foot view and look back a little bit and say, okay, it's not just my servers, right, that I'm protecting at all times and having to potentially restore. It's my entire business operation. It's the people, it's the processes, everything that else that really goes into it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it goes back to the first question, right? The landscape is so impacted from COVID. It's really changed in what companies value, and I think we see organizations that could afford, let's say, some downtime or only have a backup on certain workloads, having to completely readdress that, having to, like you said, really zoom out and understand the overall impact, that A has to Z. And I think that's something that as unfortunate as it is, has been eye-opening for organizations as they reevaluate what those goals are of developing a DR strategy. So it's not done changing, and I'm sure we'll see some different things on how people build these plans out over the next couple of weeks, couple of months.
Okay, so let's move on to a question 4, and I think we'll start with JD on this one. What would
Sure.
you think would make a more effective DR plan?
An effective DR plan.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things. I'll start with, first and foremost, I think testing. I think that is a critical part of building out a DR plan and a DR strategy. You have to have the ability to, it's great to say, hey, we have a robust tool like a CloudEndure. We're, leveraging EagleDream and AWS, all that stuff. If you don't actually know what's going to happen and who is responsible and what organizations need to be involved, if there's a disaster, having just a tool is only part of the plan, right? I think being able to say, hey, listen, we can test this very easily, monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever the organization feels is responsible. I think that's core, right? I'll also mention, I think having, and I touched on this earlier, I think having a solution and a plan in place that is flexible and automated is really going to help. I think we see from a resource perspective nowadays, with people not, being in the same room, not being able to collaborate, talk as easily, having that automation in some form in your disaster recovery plan, whether that be, um, converting the instances in AWS, or mapping out a blueprint, things like that, that can be automated for you so that it takes that kind of human element out of it. I think that that's pretty critical. There's a lot more things that I can mention, but Justin, I'll let you touch on it.
Yeah, no, those are some really good points. And I think well, what I always say is your DR plan is really only as good as your testing strategy, right? If you don't test, like you said, when you go to restore a system in the event of a disaster, and nobody knows what they're doing, and there's nothing that we can do at that point if we don't know what we're doing. So again, having a good, strong test plan, doing that on a regular cadence. So whether that's quarterly, biannually, at least once a year, that's really where you're going to uncover the risks and dependencies, and to be able to reflect those items in your run book, to outline them and say, here's the steps, this is how we have to execute it, and this is how you do it to get a system back up and running. And again, new tools and technologies are always evolving, always coming out. Being able to understand what your business needs are, to adapt the technology. Yes, maybe a tool or technology has been working for years, but that's not to say that there's not something better out there. Again, CloudEndure, a great example of that. A solution that it's a SaaS-based solution, so you don't have to manage it. It orchestrates a lot of the heavy lifting pieces for you. Super easy to implement, super easy to fail over and test out. So again, having that automation in place is incredibly important. And and I think too, the other thing I just want to say is an effective plan is really now going to have steps in there, assuming that your key people in your run book can't participate, right? In the event of a virus or something like that, where people are sick, you have to work that into your plan and account for that as part of your strategy.
Yeah, I think you had a great point too, in that you can't overlook communication, right? And I think that as people see their DR strategies being built and adapted to the new times, really want to echo the value of having everybody involved in the strategy on the same page, right? And you mentioned building out steps. Everybody's got to understand those steps, and everybody's got to be understand the testing when it happens, what role they play within the organization, because it does not just touch the application owner. Building an effective DR strategy, it goes from the bottom to the top. There's really no way around that. So keeping that communication, especially in a time where, we can't go knock on somebody's door and, say, I think we have an issue, it is really a good foundation to building out an effective DR plan.
I guess, how would you guys, well, we'll start with Justin. How would you measure success? And that would be to Justin, not JD.
I think your success, again, once you've determined things like RPO and RTO, what's that time that I have to be able to get a system back up and running in the event of a catastrophic failure? Once you define those metrics, and you can actually show that you can restore those systems and environments in that time, that is going to determine, if you've effectively executed your plan within the bounds of what you say is acceptable to, for your systems and for your business operations. JD, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think every organization is going to be different, right? Everybody's going to have different success criterias. I think that, again, this goes back to your ability to test and make sure that you're meeting your SLAs, both, internal stakeholders, customers, whatever the case may be, whatever you're protecting. that success criteria needs to be defined before you build out the plan, right? So we want to say our goal is to evaluate a technology, a platform, a partner, whatever the case may be, that can help us get to 2-hour RPO, 4-hour RTO. Whatever the case may be, you want to have that defined as a success criteria before you start to evaluate the different avenues that can help you build that, right? Like I said, the platform, the tools, the partners, whatever is going to be part of that. I would suggest defining your success of RPO and RTO specifically as you go into a DR strategy.
I like it. So we'll open it up now to questions. And if anyone has any questions, please type it into the chat, raise your hand, and we'll sort of go from there.
Come on, team. I know you got something good. Let's take, okay. I'll take this first one. So the question is, what stakeholders on your team should be involved in developing a DR plan? I mean, I want to say everybody, but I mean, it starts with certainly application owners, right? You want to make sure that everybody who's involved in the application is aware of what the strategy is and who needs to be involved in that process. And I think that trickles all the way up to the VPs, you know, and the CISOs, the CIOs, anybody that within the organization that's going to be listed as part of the runbook should be involved. Now, keep in mind, right, the CEO could be involved, because at the end of the day, if you have a website and that website goes down for 2 hours and you lose $500,000, he's the one that's doing the news brief. So I think everybody from the ground up, and I know that's sort of vague and a wide landscape, but really building a DR strategy is an organizational thing. It cannot just be, you know, 2 system engineers that build this out. It's got to touch a lot of branches of the business. Justin, what do you think?
Oh, sorry, I was going to ask a follow-up, but yeah, Justin, weigh in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think JD, you hit the nail on the head. It's going to involve multiple groups of people within an organization. You know, and again, those stakeholders may span from technical folks on an application or product team all the way up to C-level. I think everybody has a say, and you know, it's not limited to just, I'd say, one group of people. For sure, it's typically never just one small group of people.
Yep, agreed.
So I was going to ask that, have you noticed a change in who the stakeholders are? Sort of bringing this back to the COVID questions we had earlier on today. Have you noticed that there are more people involved, less people involved? If there's, you know, any difference in who's involved?
Not in particular. I will say that we're seeing more and more C-levels on our calls, because obviously, you know, from a DR perspective, this is something that touches every organization. You know, this isn't a flood in Houston where, you know, 50 companies had to build out a DR strategy. This is something that's touching everybody in the world. So I think as we build this out, we'll get more involvement from all different levels. But you know, I'm not seeing a crazy discrepancy before and after per se. I don't know if you are, Justin.
No, not necessarily. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, again, when we talk about BCDR, you know, business continuity, right? You're going to have business stakeholders in those conversations, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is more so now with COVID-19,
Yep.
because the ripple effect is just, you know, it goes all the way through every single piece of the business. So, yeah.
Gotcha. We got another one in the chat. It would be how often should you reevaluate the effectiveness of your DR plan? And we'll start with Justin.
Yeah. Again, I think it's going to depend on the resources that you can dedicate to it. Creating a DR plan and testing and executing it, it's not a small feat. You're going to have to pull in the right people. Again, like Justin mentioned before, maybe it's if you're testing a DR strategy for a particular application, you need people from that application team or product team. You might need C-level, CIO, CTO to sign off and evaluate it. Those maybe that are administrating the systems administrators, network administrators. So the administrative effort that goes into testing those plans is fairly significant.
Yep.
And I think depending on the size of the organization and number of environments and applications in scope, that's probably going to determine how often you should be testing and reevaluating technologies, because again, a lot goes into it. To have to go and throw it all away and start from scratch again in 3 to 6 months, that could be a lot for a business. So it's totally going to depend on the type of business. What do you think, JD?
Yeah, spot on. I mean, it's going to differ from organization to organization. I think Justin brings up a good point, right? Organizations will tweak things. They absolutely will. They'll tweak what, even from a mission critical perspective, right? I mean, think about what COVID has changed within organizations. That will always be changing. I do think, though, building a strong foundation will help for, that reevaluation to go from 6 months to, say, 18 months. Because to Justin's point, putting a DR plan together and putting a business continuity plan together is no small feat. We have organizations that we can put it together in 3 weeks. We have organizations that takes 2.5 years. So, it's something that you do not want to have to constantly reevaluate, but certainly something that as an organization, you should have a set plan. Every year, let's spend some time and make sure our processes, our tools are all in line with what we envision and in line with what the current times are. Because that will be something, again, that will change here and there, but building the foundation is critical.
Agreed. Yeah.
Great. Last call for questions. Anybody have any last questions that they want to throw out there? Alrighty. Well, awesome, guys. This has been absolutely spectacular. Thanks for joining me. We would love to hear perspectives from people going forward. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out. And again, thanks to absolutely everybody for doing this. Let's go to how do we get started. So before we wrap things up, Justin, do you want to sort of share how we would sort of get rolling on any of this stuff?
Sure. EagleDream, we help a variety of different customers across all different types of verticals, all different shapes and sizes. We've been in the business long enough that, we could understand business needs, from a much different perspective, from the enterprise perspective. We, in collaboration with CloudEndure, we offer a few different tiers of a kind of a DR strategy planning implementation service. So we've got 3 different tiers: standard, enhanced, enterprise tier. You can see on the screen some of the different offerings across those tiers, and really they're really geared towards the type of business that you're running, the type of systems you're protecting. If you need just general guidance around implementing something like CloudEndure, and kind of getting that set up and getting the ball rolling, standard tier is probably great for you. If you're looking for a little bit more hands-on, or even more towards the larger scale DR planning, that might be more of an enhanced or enterprise tier. So again, we're happy to talk and see what your business needs are, see what your technology needs are, and help you determine, how we can help you out as you build out your DR strategy.
All right. Oh, sorry, Justin, JD, do you want to have anything?
No, I was just going to say, excellent.
Yeah, I was gonna apologize. I had a computer freak out for a second there, so apologies. But to wrap things up, thanks everyone for participating. Thanks for coming online today. We will be sending out a copy of both the slide deck and the recording after this via email. Any feedback, anything else that you guys come up with, please continue the conversation. Contact us directly via LinkedIn, whatever method is easiest for you. And by all means, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions that come up. Again, thanks everyone for hopping on. It was great. And thanks to both the Justins.
Thank you, Roman. Appreciate everybody jumping on. Hopefully this was beneficial for you, and hope everyone stays safe.